a small but very large woman. She wasn't that big, but very extremely powerful. Powerful presence. Very giving, but at the same time no nonsense. Very no nonsense person. I mean, you know, if you said something that she didn't like, she would let you know right away. In no uncertain terms, you know. You're not putting your own self in this, Cristina. I don't hear your voice, you know. That's it. Or, what is this date? This date is not corresponding to the Kurgan invasion. You know, I mean, you know, she said, where does this come from? In other words, you know, she had her definite thorny points.
She's happy to tell you.
Well, I heard of Marija before I met her, of course. You know, I heard of Marija in the 70s. And I was preparing for my master's dissertation at NYU, and this is when I first came in contact, actually, with Mothers in Amazon by Helen Diner, and my research went from there. You know, then I began to discover Jane Harrison and Bachofen and people like that, and then suddenly Marija came into the picture. Somebody told me about Marija. And you know, I read Gods and Goddesses. It was called Gods and Goddesses at that point, of all Europe, and then I longed to meet her. And then the opportunity came to meet her at a conference in Malta called the Archaeology and Fertility Conference, Fertility Cults in Malta. And so this was the very first conference of its kind. And we all went there because I belonged to a goddess group. And so 8 of us from the goddess group went to this conference as delegates. And that's when I first met Marija, at a conference in Malta. And we did a ritual there, 9 of us, 10 of us women, in which we had the hypogeum all to ourselves for 2 hours. Nobody was allowed in, you know, no tourists and so on. And we chanted and we danced and we, you know, we said profound things and we passed around little gifts and we did all kinds of things, and Marija was, you know, in the center of all this. She was enjoying it thoroughly, and then at one point we circled. We did a circle dance, and she was in the middle of the circle dance. And she suddenly began to extempore. She started to talk as if she were the goddess's agent, as if she were a priestess of the goddess. She started to talk and talk and talk, and we, as if she were inspired. And we were all, you know, spellbound by this. We were all surrounding her like this. And none of us really remembers what she said, but we just remember that it was a very, very special event. Mm. And then the next day, 3 of us, who were already menopausal, you know, menstruated, which is to show you how powerful this, you know, this ritual that we did in the hypogeum was with Marija. And that's how I first met Marija, at this, you know, at this conference. And then we, this was wonderful because at the conference every night we got very chummy right away. We would have dinner with her, and Patricia Rice was there, so we would have dinner with Marija and her accolades, or her different people that surrounded her, including Patricia Rice. There were about 3 of them. And my friends and I and Marija and her friends would get together, and we would have these wonderful dinners and drink wine and talk about, you know, wonderful things about the Neolithic and how things were, and it was all under the stars in Malta. It was just a great period of time, you know, after the trials and tribulations of the conference. Well, she was, you know, she was not accepted by the powers that be. Even Colin Renfrew. No, actually Colin Renfrew was a little bit more charitable, but I mean, he obviously there was a difference between them, between his beliefs and Marija's beliefs, and most archaeologists there were in disagreement with Marija. It made her feistier. It made her even more, you know, because she knew she was right, and we knew she was right, and she had the proof of it. I mean, she had archaeological proof that these things had happened in the Neolithic. And so it made her, it strengthened her, I think.
So, what is it, why do you think that there's such a resistance From your own point of view and your own experience, why do you think there's such a resistance to Marija's theories of the goddess?
Because we're still living in a patriarchy, because men feel very threatened, you know, conventional men feel very threatened by women's power, and they don't need to. They think that, you know, women are going to take over the way they took over way, way back, you know, the way the patriarchy took over way, way back. And they think that this, you know, that this is going to happen. And I think that's the reason. That's the basic reason. Yes, Luigi Cavalli Sforza and many other people, including this new book by Bill Ryan, Noah's Flood.
And what is he saying in Noah's Flood?
He's saying basically that there was a huge flood in the 6th millennium, and that people, that the Black Sea started out by being much, much smaller. It was a little lake. It wasn't connected to the Mediterranean. It was a little freshwater lake, and that the Mediterranean Sea, if you can picture this visually, the Mediterranean Sea at one point in time spilled over into the Black Sea and started dispersing. And so people started to, you know, move away. Okay? So, I mean, that brings a whole different, you know, it's a whole different dimension. Marija would have adored this theory. I mean, she would have really made something out of it with her. I mean, it kind of, and he talks about Marija Gimbutas. You know, it kind of is one more step towards proving some of her theories.
Right. Particular.
She's had an influence on my, you know, on my writing, of course. And she's had an influence on my art, too. You know, in terms of the goddess, putting the goddess forefront and the importance of the goddess and so on. And she was extremely generous with people who were doing work. So I said, Marija, can I call you up at, you know, after this conference and so on and so forth? I gave her a copy of my dissertation. And I said, can I call you up and maybe you can give me suggestions as to how to publish it? So I called her up, and she invited me to come out to the Topanga Canyon. So I spent 4 days there, you know, with her. She was working in one room, I was working in the other. She gave me the living room in which to work and so on. And we would shout to each other and so on, you know, as we were working. And I was in the process of reading, you know, one of the things that I did was to read the language of the goddess, you know, which it wasn't finished quite. And she told me basically, at the end of this, you know, this period of time, she said, Cristina, just cut the book in half and publish the second part because it's the more original part. And then later on you can go and publish the first part after, you know. So basically that's what she said, you know, publish the second. And that's exactly what I did. And she loves dogs. And then we got to talking about dachshunds, because I have dachshunds. And so she said, oh, Cristina, you have dachshunds. Dachshunds were my favorite dog when I was a child. And I said, oh, Marija, actually, my dog, you know, one of my dogs is having puppies. And would you like a dog? Oh, yes, oh, yes. Then we could be related. So I sent her Pupite. I sent her a little black dachshund, long-haired dachshund. And she loves this little dog. She called it Pupite, which means little doll in Lithuanian. So I would call her up on the phone, and before we talked about anything else, before we talked about research or anything else, we would talk about Pupite. Oh, how is Pupite, Marija? Oh, Pupite is getting very fat. I don't know what to do. She has a lot of fleas. What can I do, Cristina? And then I would tell her, you know. So that was our first line of conversation about the dog. I don't think she went too far. I think somebody has to go too far, maybe, in order to really have a balance. I mean, I think that the trouble with archaeology now is that people look at objects. They look at objects. They catalog them. And they don't go far enough. They don't go anywhere really with them. They don't interpret them. And she at least interpreted, whether for wrong or right. At least she gives us some kind of direction in which to go. And then, you know, we can go in another direction as a result. But we're not stymied and stopped by the usual archaeological non-interpretation that happens all the time. I mean, you read these tomes of archaeology, and then at the end, conclusion. There is no conclusion. At least she made conclusions. She gave you food for further research.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And don't you think it's a message for our time?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Can
yes.
you comment on that?
A message for our time, yes. I mean, I think we have to stop just cataloging, acquiring, and so forth, and we have to work with what we have. We have to go on from there. We have to create theories. We have to see into the future. We have to try to let objects speak to us. We have to use our intuition, which she did. We have to use our other senses besides just the brain. We have to use all of our senses the way she did.
Exactly. And my other
more and more, because she was in contact with, she was much more in contact with the earth than I think, usual archaeologists are.
Absolutely.
And I think this contact really served her very well in her theories. She's given us a model. She's given us a model, and she's given us tremendous inspiration for the future, to live in balance with the earth, to consider that the earth is alive, that all of the creatures are as important as we are, and so on. I think that's also tremendous contribution from her. She's given us back our heritage, our roots. She's taken away some of the fogginess, and so that we can see, we can feel by intuition in the past that things were better, and that things could be better if we follow, a more organic path. Yeah. Her legacy is that people have, she's brought the goddess, to the center stage. The goddess and all what the goddess represents. This organic looking at the world, at our earth, at our cosmos, and so on and so forth. While other archaeologists have talked about the goddess, peripherally and so on and so forth, E.O. James, Bachofen, all of these people, and Joseph Campbell too, he talks about the goddess, but much more, she's not center stage. The goddess for Marija is in the center, she's the mandala, and she's the important being, and she was with us since the beginning of time. And Marija is, has given this to us. She's given us back our roots, so that we feel, we don't put down intuition any longer, and we feel, that there was something better, in our past life. Change is always extremely difficult for people. For most people, it is for me. And for most people, it's terribly difficult to envision something different, and to envision the fact that we have to really change, and we have to clean out. We have to get rid of. We have to change, and that's very difficult. And I think that's the kernel of it. And Marija is advocating this. She's advocating a new way of looking at the world. She's part of that whole movement, advocating a new way of looking at the world. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of intuiting. It's a way of conducting your life and more in balance with more sensitivity towards everything, And that's very difficult if you think about it. It's very difficult to do that. What brought that forth? I've been interested in the Medusa theme for a long time, about 20 years and so on, and I've been doing Medusas off and on, different Medusas. I did one. The first one that I did was one with hair coming. I did a black Medusa that I called the crone Medusa, and I put her on a field of faces, of women's faces, looking out at the audience and at the viewer. And she's life-size, and she's really my face. She's black, and she has these snakes that come out, And she's on a kind of a shield, just like Caravaggio's Medusa. And the women are coming visually. The outside has the big faces, and then the faces get smaller and smaller and smaller as they get closer to her face, so that you have a feeling of depth. Okay, so I called that the black Medusa or the crone. Then I did a red Medusa, who's a laughing Medusa, and the same thing. She's also on a shield, and she has, she's bright red, and she has laughing faces. Everybody's laughing, 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 And so, you know, I've been interested in this theme because, I mean, Medusa is the no-nonsense kind of being. Very much, in some ways, you know, she cuts the cord of deception, you know, pang, and she's like the scream in the night of, you know, of women who have been deceived. I mean, she's really a very powerful being. So this Medusa that I made about a year ago, I just suddenly decided that I wanted to do another Medusa. So I did a small one like this. But I intended to blow it up, you know, because I wanted to really do a big one. And I came across a photograph of Maria Callas, who was singing, and she's singing a high C in the opera Norma by Bellini, and she's singing at the Met, and she was a no-nonsense person. She was a Medusa kind of like person. Just like Marija Gimbutas was also a Medusa in some ways, you know. I mean, she's a no-nonsense, especially when she tackles Colin Renfrew, you know, in the things she says to him. So I used Maria Callas as my model for this, like this, for the model for this Medusa, and I exaggerated, you know, of course. One month after I'd finished this Medusa, my partner Pat came down with ovarian cancer. So it was kind of like, you know, so I consider this Medusa an apotropaic figure, you know, like they used on temples, you know, the Medusas were used on top of temples to keep away the evil spirits. Okay, so she's keeping away the evil spirits. She's keeping this house free of evil spirits and evil influences. That's her mission, and that's one mission for you know, of Medusa too. It gets deeper and deeper. Yes.
Yeah. That's what I feel like.
And I mean, the research that is done, you know, around her work and so on and so forth gets deeper and deeper.
Yeah. And we'll
and more broad, or far-ranging.